Hello, this is Inner Astrology. Today we're going to slow things down a bit. Usually we like to jump right in, high energy facts, transits, all that cosmic weather. But this stack of sources we're looking at today, it just requires a different kind of attention. We're doing a deep dive into something that feels, well, honestly, it feels a little invasive. But I think in the most necessary way possible, we are talking about repeating patterns.
It is a heavy topic, I won't lie. It's a vital one, though. And just to be clear for everyone listening, when we say repeating patterns, we aren't, talking about losing your keys every Tuesday. We are talking about that specific heavy feeling right in the center of your chest. When you realize you have ended up in the exact same emotional situation, again, different people, different year, maybe a different job title or a new city, but the feeling, it's identical.
The source material describes this moment so perfectly. It calls it the disappointment of recognition. I think that really lands. It's not just failure. It's that realization of, oh no, I know this place. I promised myself, I swore to myself I wouldn't end up here again. And yet here you are.
That specific phrase, the disappointment of recognition, is really the anchor for this whole conversation. Because usually when we hit that moment, our immediate reaction is just shame. We think, I'm broken, or I'm stupid, or I didn't do the work. We treat it like a report card that we failed.
Right. It feels like a moral failing. Like if I were a better person or, a smarter person, I wouldn't be dating the same type of emotionally unavailable person for the third time. Or I wouldn't be burnt out at a job that promised it would be different.
Exactly. But the core mission of this deep dive and the perspective these sources take is to completely shift how we look at that. We aren't here to discuss how to escape faster. We're here to discuss why your system returns there. And the biggest takeaway, the headline really, is that astrology doesn't view this as a moral issue. It views it as a structural issue.
Structural. That's a very clinical word for something that feels so messy.
It is, but it's liberating, I think. The thesis here is that repetition is not evidence of failure. It's not evidence that you didn't learn the lesson. It is evidence of loyalty.
Loyalty. Okay, you're going to have to sell me on that one. Because usually when I'm in a toxic loop, loyal is not the word I'd use. I'd use like self-sabotaging.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive, but think about the nervous system. The source argues that your nervous system is simply being loyal to what once helped you survive. Even if that mechanism is hurting you now, say, shutting down or overworking to prove your worth, at one point, that behavior kept you safe. It worked.
So it's not that we are broken. It's that we are running an old operating system, one that was designed for a different environment.
Precisely. And let's unpack the physics of this, because the sources use this really compelling metaphor of gravity.
I love that visual.
They suggest we look at the birth chart not as a fortune-telling device, but as a map of your emotional gravity. We think we want happiness, consciously, of course we do, but the chart reveals that we are actually pulled toward familiar gravity.
And gravity is a force of nature. It doesn't care what you want.
Precisely. Gravity doesn't negotiate, it doesn't ask permission, it just draws things back into orbit. So the chart shows us what kind of tension your body perceives as normal and what kind of environment your nervous system recognizes as home.
That makes so much sense of why willpower often fails. You can consciously want a healthy, easy dynamic, but if your gravity is set to high tension, you're just going to be pulled back.
You are fighting physics with thoughts. It's a losing battle. The takeaway is really stark. You don't choose the pattern. Until you understand that gravity, the pattern chooses you.
Okay, so if the chart is the map of this gravity, let's look at the specific players involved. The source material breaks this down by planet, which I found so helpful. It starts with the moon.
Right. And in the context of repeating patterns, the moon is defined as orientation. It's the part of you that teaches your nervous system this is what life feels like. It defines your baseline.
And this brings up the concept of moon memory, which was a term I hadn't seen used this way. It explains so much about why we reject peace.
Right. Think about it this way. If you grew up in an environment where emotional safety was, inconsistent, your moon didn't learn ease. It learned vigilance. It learned that love comes with a side order of panic. So later in life, when you encounter a situation that is full of tension or uncertainty, your body goes, aha, I know this.
It feels recognizable, feels like home, even if home was a war zone.
Exactly. And that's the trap. The source says that for people with this kind of moon memory, peace can feel strangely boring or even suspicious, while stress feels engaging because the nervous system recognizes stress as known.
I think that addresses that question we hear all the time. Why do I attract these crazy situations?
And the correction the source makes is so vital here. You aren't attracting them, you are recognizing them.
That is a subtle but massive distinction. Can you break that down?
Sure. It means that when you walk into a room with 10 people and one of them is chaotic and 9 are stable, your moon recognizes the emotional weather of the chaotic one before your logical mind intervenes. And here's the kicker. Recognition feels like intuition.
Oh, that is dangerous. That is really dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous. You meet someone and it feels familiar, so you think, this feels like a connection, this feels right. But it's just your moon saying, we have been here before. You aren't being guided by destiny, you're being guided by history.
So the moon sets the scene, the baseline. But then we have the ascendant, and the source describes the ascendant in a way I hadn't really considered as a strategy.
Yes, the ascendant is often the mask or first impression, but here it's the strategy for acceptance. It's not who you are deep down, it is the role you learn to play to make sure people would let you in.
It's the cover charge for the club.
Exactly. And in these loops, the ascendant plays the same character every time. Depending on your chart, you might be the fixer, the calm one, the observer, the capable one.
I relate to the capable one, the person who handles the crisis so nobody else has to panic.
And it works, right? That's why we do it. You enter a chaotic relationship and you activate your ascendant strategy. People love it. But the problem is the ascendant is a strategy, not a source of nourishment. It's output, not input.
The phrase that stood out to me here was exhausted by their own competence. I think a lot of you listening right now might feel that in your bones. You don't feel used exactly. You feel necessary.
And necessity feels meaningful. It feels like love to a lot of us. If I am useful, I am safe. But it drains you completely. You disappear inside the role that kept you safe. This is why you can be in a relationship for years and feel completely invisible, because you aren't actually present. Only your strategy is.
Man, that is tough to hear, but so true. It's like being an actor who forgot they can leave the stage. So the moon is the feeling of home. The ascendant is the strategy. But what happens when the pressure gets turned up? This is where Mars enters the chat.
Mars is the reaction. When the moon can't rest and the emotional processing gets too difficult, the system says, I can't feel this anymore, I need to do something. Mars takes over.
And Mars isn't exactly known for its subtlety or long-term planning.
No, Mars is immediate. It chooses quickly, not wisely. It's the fight or flight response. If you learned that force works, you might explode. If you learned that silence is safer, you might withdraw.
The source calls this a behavioral loop. Instead of saying, I feel uncomfortable, the body goes straight to, I need to leave.
Precisely. Mars moves where the moon cannot settle. But then we have to ask the really difficult question. Why do we stay? If it hurts and we're reacting poorly and we're exhausted, why don't we just leave?
And this is where Saturn comes in. And honestly, this was the darkest part of the deep dive for me. I usually like Saturn structure, building things, but here, Saturn is the glue holding the nightmare together.
It is. Saturn is endurance, responsibility. In a repeating pattern of trauma or stress, Saturn is the voice that whispers, just a little longer, or you made a commitment, or the worst one, you should be able to handle this.
You should be able to handle this. That is such a dangerous sentence. It sounds like resilience, but it's a trap.
It is. The key insight from the text, and this is something everyone should write down, is that Saturn doesn't ask if a situation is nourishing. It only asks if it is survivable.
Wow. It doesn't care if you're happy, just if you're still standing.
Correct. Saturn values durability, and that is how loyalty turns into self-abandonment. It convinces you that leaving would be a failure of character rather than an act of self-preservation.
So we have the moon seeking familiar stress, the ascendant managing it, Mars reacting, and Saturn forcing us to endure it. It sounds like a prison. But there has to be a reason we like it, right? There has to be a carrot on the stick.
That's Venus. And this is the uncomfortable truth the source forces us to look at. We repeat them because on some level, something about them feels good.
Right. It's not all bad. If it were all bad, we'd leave.
Exactly. Venus shows what soothes us. And sometimes what soothes us is intensity. Sometimes it's the feeling of being needed. That savior complex feels delicious to Venus. Sometimes it's the reconciliation after the fight, that rush. Venus shows us that leaving a toxic pattern often feels like a loss, not relief.
It's like an addiction to a very specific flavor of affection.
Yes. And to wrap up the planetary lineup, we have Mercury, the storyteller. This is the voice in our head explaining why we're doing what we're doing.
Mercury is the narrator.
Mercury provides the logic, but in a loop, it provides familiar logic. It's the rationalization. I'm just sensitive. It's probably my fault. I'm overthinking it. Mercury is the PR agent for the pattern.
The PR agent. I
Ah.
love that. It spins the story so the pattern looks acceptable.
It does. It protects the pattern by explaining it away.
Yeah.
And speaking of wiring, the source also mentions aspects briefly here, calling them circuits. I liked that.
Yeah, can you explain that? Because the circuit idea made it click for me.
Think of a hard aspect, like a square between two planets, as a closed electrical circuit. Let's say you have a Moon-Saturn square. That circuit might be feeling leads to restraint. Every time you feel an emotion, Moon, the circuit immediately routes it to restriction, Saturn. It's not a choice, it's wiring.
So we have this map. We can see the Moon, Mars, Saturn, all of it. And this leads to the most frustrating part for intelligent people. Insight. We can see it. We can analyze it. But we still do it.
That is the crux of the issue. The source states clearly, insight is necessary but not sufficient. You can understand your pattern perfectly and still repeat it tomorrow.
Why? That seems so unfair. If I know the stove is hot, why do I touch it?
Because insight is a mental process. Repetition is a nervous system process. Knowing why you touch the stove doesn't stop your hand from reaching out if your hand believes the stove is the only source of warmth in the room.
So how do we actually break it? Because if understanding it isn't enough, are we just doomed? The source material is very specific that we cannot force our way out of this.
Right. Patterns don't break through force, they soften through relief. This is a radical shift in strategy. Usually we try to white-knuckle our way into better behavior, but that's just adding more tension.
So what does relief look like? Is it just taking a bubble bath?
No, it's deeper. It looks like changing the structure. Reducing exposure to draining environments even if you should be able to handle them. The shift in questioning is vital. Stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what kind of structure would make this easier for me?
That's going back to the Saturn thing. Instead of enduring, we build a structure that actually supports us.
Exactly. And the moment of change, the moment the pattern actually breaks, isn't this big dramatic movie scene. It's very quiet.
The source describes it as naming the familiarity.
Yes. It's the moment you're in that situation, the pressure is in your chest, and instead of reacting, you just pause. You take one breath and you think, this feels normal, but it doesn't feel good.
This feels normal, but it doesn't feel good. That is such a simple sentence, but it dismantles the whole illusion.
It creates a wedge between familiarity and truth. Once familiarity is named, it loses its authority. You stop obeying it automatically because you've exposed it as a memory, not a directive. You realize, oh, this isn't my future, this is just my past echoing.
It reminds me of the idea that astrology isn't an escape hatch. It's not going to beam you up out of your problems.
No, and anyone promising that is selling snake oil. Astrology is orientation. It allows you to see what is happening while it is happening. It creates that tiny space to pause, to breathe, and to choose not to return to the orbit.
And I think that's where the hope lies. It's not about being perfect. It's about not being on autopilot.
Precisely. The source leaves us with this beautiful thought. Your chart is not a trap. It is a map of how survival became repetition. You developed these patterns because you wanted to live. There is honor in that.
It goes back to where we started. Loyalty. We were loyal to our survival.
Yes. But now, with the map in hand, you can thank that loyalty for its service and acknowledge that the war is over. You don't have to fight your way out. You just have to stop mistaking that old familiarity for your future destiny.
Stop mistaking familiarity for destiny. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a long time. It really changes the stakes.
It's a practice, a
Yeah.
daily one, but it's the only one that works.
It is. And for everyone listening, if you are currently standing in that place of disappointment, that place where you promised you wouldn't end up again, just remember, you haven't failed. You've just recognized the map. And seeing the map is the first step to walking somewhere new.
Well said.
That's it for this deep dive into inner astrology. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves.